Welcome back to Let the Quran Speak. Our second topic for the day is women's rights in Islam. Now, Brother Shabir, often when I talk to non-Muslims and we go around, you get to hear things like, we don't like how women are treated in Islam or the status of women in Islam. But once you go into questioning it per se, you never really get a proper answer. There's not one thing that they pinpoint. But what seems to be coming out, what seems to be idea here is that for some reason, Islam seems like, for one, a very patriarchal society, which means that women are always sheltered, they're always cared for. The idea that, I think some scholars have put it in the past that this is a gem that you have to cover up and you have to keep protected. Is this how Islam views women? Because if this is it, then it renders them powerless. It seems like they have to be protected from everything.
Yeah, I think you've made a number of important observations. One is that when people say that something is wrong with the way in which Islam treats women, they may be hard-pressed to come up with a real example, because to really say that Islam says something, Islam is not the name of a person here that we're referring to. We're referring to a set of ideas, a theology, and that has to be based on the Quran. So if someone is saying Islam teaches this, you might expect that they have something in the Quran that actually says that. Though it's not limited to the Quran, but this is our primary document. It's the first stepping point. That's where we're going to look into first. And we cannot find anything in the Quran actually that demotes women, that gives them secondary status as a kind of absolute teaching for all time and place to come. The Quran, of course, is a book for all time and place. Some of its prescriptions were conditional, were historical. They had to do with the social and political structure that existed at the time of the Quranic revelation. But then there are also absolute teachings, which are universal, which transcend time and place, which have to be done by Muslims for all time to come, for example, worshiping God, for example, giving charity, and so on. But when it comes to the dealing with when it comes to dealing with the status of women, we could not find anything in the Quran that is of a universal nature and places women at any kind of disadvantage. On the contrary, we find the universal texts of the Quran seem to place women on equal par with men. For example, the text about creation: God created you from a single soul and then made from you its mate. That the term for soul here, in grammatically, actually is feminine, as though God created you from the feminine and then made you into a pair, and then from the pair scattered people into many different nations and tribes. So the respect for the woman is given actually right from the very inception, even from the description of the creation. But you are also correct in that Muslim societies tend to be patriarchal, and women are overly protected in this way, often protected against their own wishes and desires. And this is taking the protection too far. I don't think too many people would object to being looked after, cared for, protected, helped, supported, and so on. It's when that help and support is wielded over a person as to the person's own disadvantage, that, of course, we find that there is injustice that needs to be corrected.
Now, to speak of overprotectiveness, one thing that we see is very common, even today in many Muslim societies, is this idea of when the woman is getting married, the father or the brother or whoever it may be would choose them a spouse and tell them, okay, this is it, this is good for you, doesn't matter if you don't like it, with time you'll understand that this is what's best for you. Now, is this kind of idea, this kind of ideology coming from Islam?
I don't see that. What I see, on the contrary, is that there is a verse in the Quran which says, actually, do not prohibit the women from marrying their husbands, meaning the husbands that they choose for themselves. But, interpretation steps in and gets in the way. So an interpreter would say, oh, but this is only regarding the woman who was previously married, because now she is mature, she knows all about married life, and she is in a position really to choose her own husband. But that is only an interpretation. In fact, Imam Abu Hanifa, one of the great scholars of Islam, said that the woman has more right to dispose of her own self than her wali or guardian or male relatives. But of course, some such interpretations get shoved into the background, and others become more prominent. And then if we ask, okay, well, if you say that verse was only for the mature women, well, where do you have a verse that says that the non-mature woman cannot marry herself? And then it will be pointed out that there's a verse which says, marry them with the permission of their guardians, of their people. But the verse they're looking at actually is a verse that deals with slave women. So slave women, of course, did not have the full freedom. And if you use that verse to say that other women cannot marry themselves, that's treating the other women also like the slave women, you see? So we get everything actually mixed up, upside down, and backwards. But if we are willing to take a fresh look at the Quran and study it carefully, we can say that the system of guardianship that was put in place was there for a number of reasons. One is that there was no lower limit on the age at which a person could get married. Minors were given away in marriage. And if a girl was given away in marriage, we wanted to make sure that she was actually given away by persons who can really be trusted within that social context to be making a good and favorable decision for her. So it would have to be her father. In the absence of the father, it would be the grandfather, and so on. There is a structure that is known and recognized. But once women are basically on their own, they are getting their own education, they can assert their own identity, and they can govern themselves, definitely they have more rights, as Imam Abu Hanifa already pointed out 1,000 years ago. They have more right to dispose of themselves than their male relatives.
Now, very quickly, practically speaking, I've seen more than a dozen nikah ceremonies or marriage ceremonies in Islam, and for some reason the bride is never present in the signing of the contract. It's always her brother or her father, the wali, as you spoke of, the guardian is there. Is there a reason why the woman can't be present while the contract is being signed?
Well, she can be. Traditionally, the women, of course, and men kept separate dwellings, and they associated with each other in separate areas, so that there was no intermingling, disguarded against promiscuity, and so on. The whole society was structured in this way. Where the society is no longer structured in that way, where people are getting together and they're studying together and so on, to do it this way seems a little bit artificial. It seems almost like a joke when in some cases you have the couple going out already together, and then when it comes to the wedding, then they have this great show of separation and complete discipline and so on. One has to maintain a balance between the two extremes, and I think a reasonable balance would be struck if at the time of the ceremony, both parties to the contract are there, and though the guardian or the wali, who traditionally represents the woman in her marriage contract, would be present, his role would be there more so as a kind of support to the female who is getting married, rather than to be there in the forefront and to be doing everything himself, where the woman is receding to the background. And though the witnesses would have gotten her testimony and her permission to conduct the marriage, that is done more in private, and we would like to make that even more public.
Thank you, Brother Shabir.